from the side of the road because I think we got something like 16 inches of snow. And it was kind of depressing because like I'd see people shoveling or using their snow plows yesterday. And like by the time they were done with like one side of the sidewalk, the other side was already covered. It was really
utility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was actually a state of emergency and nobody was even allowed to use the roads for a while, but it looks like it's cleared up and, you know, everyone's back to their normal schedules.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. We are live. Welcome to Seminar, everyone. I'm just talking to our guest today, Brett, about the weather where he is in New York. I live in San Diego in Southern California, USA, specifically so I don't have to deal with this kind of awful stuff. So I just get to be a viewer from afar. So that's really, I'm glad that the weather is getting better. So yeah, today seminar is going to be really fun, I think, and a little bit more like lighthearted, I think, than usual. We're just going to be kind of chatting with Brett today, who is a really, I'm going to go ahead and say like developer in our ecosystem that I would suggest other people to look up to. And so we're going to talk about why that is. And so if you're a developer in our ecosystem and you're looking for ways to kind of really get more involved and like kind of in some ways from where I stand, like almost make it to the end of the journey, you know, Brett is a really great person to kind of to learn about what that was like for him. But actually, Brett, we were just talking about some stuff that you did in school, and you were telling me that you spent almost an entire year in Tokyo.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome.
I studied abroad there. My first, I guess I call it my first junior year, or maybe my before my first senior year, because it did cost me an extra year in school, but I think it was definitely worth it. It was an awesome experience. I was saying it was the first time I rode a bike in like 5 years there, which is definitely super nerve-wracking. I think honestly, maybe the most nerve-wracking part of that entire experience was trying to buy a bike and it going to a store and explaining that I needed a bike, because actually what's super different about Japan versus the US is that all bikes need to be registered under your name. So like before I could even get a bike, I had to like make sure I had my ID card.
Oh, so it's like almost like a little car or something.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like do government stuff and everything to get the bike. That's yeah, that would be a lot. So what you studied in Buffalo, right? In New York?
Yes. Yeah.
And then just through that school, did they help you get the year abroad in Japan, or did you do that on your own, or how did that all work?
Yeah, there's a study abroad department at my school, and I guess my school actually had an exchange program. So people from ICU, the school in Tokyo, would come to Buffalo, and I would go to Tokyo. Obviously, I got the better deal there. But yeah, and that's part of the
angry Japanese person in Buffalo writing you letters like, you tricked me.
I mean, let's just say that yesterday, you know, it was snowing pretty hard, but that's not a weird day in Buffalo. That's pretty normal for the winter there. Yeah. But yeah, and that's part of the reason I really wanted to do the program was because it was an exchange program. It was the full year instead of like one semester, and I really wanted to immerse myself.
Really?
And not feel like rushed while I was there. So that was really awesome.
So do you speak Japanese?
By the time I left, I think my Japanese was pretty much good enough to get around doing things day to day. Obviously no like super complex conversations or anything like that. Unfortunately, I haven't really been able to study since then, so I don't know how much I've retained. I'd love to get back into it at some point, but obviously.
Actually, Brett and I started having this conversation because I was chatting about his bike back there, and he was telling me about that he rode his bike in Japan, and talking a language is a lot like, well, it's not like riding a bike, because they say once you know how to ride a bike, you like always know how to do it. With a language, you have to like practice at it. It's like more like an instrument or something like that, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. So, what do you think about like what was the differences in like the education system like between the U.S. and Japan?
I went to a fairly like international school. I think it was it was like 80% Japanese students, 20% international students. So I don't know any like big differences. The biggest difference for me, and I don't think this is a Japan thing, it was just that the school was so much smaller than my school in Buffalo. So 30,000 students to like 3,000. So it almost felt like going back to high school to a certain extent in terms of like now 100+ person lectures. It was all like small class. That was probably the biggest like change in terms of the structure of everything. I had what
do you think about? I went to a really big college too. I went to UT, which is 50,000 people. So I would have really big lectures too. And because I'm the kind of person that like, sometimes I wish I didn't stand out so much. I mean, clearly I'm not doing that good of a job at that, but you know, I kind of liked these huge classes where I could just kind of like disappear. What did you think about like being in both? Do you have a preference or?
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like with the big lectures, sometimes that gives you the, depending on the professor and everything, it gives you the luxury of sort of learning at your own pace. Because like you said, you know, you don't necessarily have to stand out too much. And a lot of professors, you know, they pre-record their lectures and stuff. Obviously, attendance isn't a huge thing in a 500-person lecture or something like that. Whereas, you know, when there's 20-something people in the class, they see that you're not there. So you have to go literally all the time, which is a good thing. But at the same time, you know, not as much flexibility when you want to be doing other stuff.
I like it. See, Brett speaks the truth. That's why we have Brett on Seminar. I like it. That's great. So awesome. I mean, that was cool learning about school a little bit. And then I think you hadn't been out of school that long when you started learning about Substrate. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's actually a really funny story because I think like a lot of people, I had a friend actually back when I was in Japan who like messaged me out of the blue one day and was like, this thing, cryptocurrency, it's taking off. You could become like a millionaire. Like you have to invest. Like everyone's making so much money. Like I just send me some money. I'll invest for you. This is my good friend. He wasn't like scamming me. And he's like, and we'll be like, well, you know, we'll make a ton of money. It'll be awesome. And so I'm like, okay, like you know, it sounds like you know what you're talking about. So I sent him like a good chunk of change, and like probably a few days later, I get a message being like, okay, it's all gone. Like none of this exists. I like, you know, I think that some of these might take off again in the future, but right now your investment is worth like 1/10 maybe of what it was before. And at that point I was just like, okay, this is stupid. Like I don't care about this anymore. Like this is just it's either a scam or like whatever. I don't see the appeal and anything like that.
Yeah. Yep.
So that was while I was in college. So now fast forward to I just graduated, and I didn't have a job lined up or anything. So I'm just sort of like looking around for things to do. And my brother, he's actually super into crypto, and he has been for a really long time. And at this point in time, my crypto knowledge consisted of asking him like, okay, but like what's on your hard wallet? Like, are the Bitcoins on the wallet? Like, can I not just copy paste them into another wallet? Now I have double Bitcoins. And so he, besides getting annoyed at me, would recommend.
By the way, I've also spoken with Brett's brother, and he's a super great guy. So this is, continue. Sorry, this is funny.
Yeah, no, he's great. He's great. I think I was just annoying him with like these questions that like to us now I understand like they don't really make sense, but yeah. So he recommended that I check out Gitcoin because he was like, you're not doing anything like while you're looking for jobs and stuff.
Typical older brother.
Yeah.
Go look at Gitcoin, loser.
Yeah, he's like, just go do something. Like, I don't know what you're doing. So he tells me to check out Gitcoin. And he's like, you know, you did a bunch of hackathons in college. Like, these are hackathons. It's more crypto-based typically. But, like, maybe you could do something there, get some money, do something. I'm like, okay, sure. So I'm looking at the website. And I was checking it, like, every couple of days just to see if anything popped up. And, like, a lot of the hackathons were, like, you know, interesting. But, like, the baseline technology I had no understanding of. So I would just like ignore it. And then I stumbled across like Hello World. Because, you know, as programmers, we know Hello World is like your entry point into a like programming language.
Exactly.
So I checked it out, and I really liked how it was so beginner friendly. Like, it wasn't build a big project like I was used to and like have a really good understanding of this and make something that's going to wow everybody. It was just like, hey, do this and like do some coding here and like learn this ecosystem thing. And so I thought that was pretty.
People know, just in case there's some people who may not know, Hello World was the Polkadot Substrate Gitcoin challenge that ended what, maybe like three or 4 months ago, something like that. And
yeah, I think it ended the end of October.
Yeah, it was pretty successful. So yeah, and so you were saying that you really liked it because it was kind of like these bite-sized chunks to help you learn about the ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. And like with every single different challenge that I did, I would read the Wikipedia page and I would read the documentation. And, you know, as I was doing more challenges, I started thinking like, I started asking questions that I couldn't find in the documentation and thinking, well, I should, you know, update the documentation. I should add this back, you know, so if somebody else has these same questions, they can help out. So I started doing some like PR requests for the documentation. And then I started just hanging out in the Discord a lot and answering questions there. And I think by the time I finished the hackathon, I had done 22 of the like 25 available challenges. So that was really awesome. And
so actually, you were kind of like laughing at yourself because, I asked my brother this like really stupid question, like what's on your hard wallet? It's a really, really good question, actually. Yeah. You want to like it. So now it sounds like you know the answer to that question. Like you want to tell us that, like, what did you learn to tell us what's on the hard wallet and why you can't just copy and paste the Bitcoins?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I think the word wallet is almost like a misnomer because it implies that there are like, yeah, it's almost like, it's almost more like what you have in the Polkadot JS API. It's a keychain really, because it's what holds your public and private keys, which then sort of are able to verify you and give you access to like the blockchain and your coins and whatever things you want to do. And so, you know, having it be a wallet, I expected like my coins are on the wallet. And like when you hear all these stories about people in the past being like, there were $6 million worth of Bitcoin on this old hard drive that this guy's digging through the dump for. It's like, no, it's not actually on the hard drive. It's
exactly.
Just like, yeah. It's like the key to his safety deposit box.
Exactly.
There.
So the wallet, many people know I tend to crow about the same thing over and over again. I'm really into identity on the blockchain. And really what that means is the identity is someone who has possession of a key. That's what's in the wallet, is the key, which is like a driver's license or something like that, or like, you know, something you may use at work to like gain access to something. And so it's this very important, secure thing. And if you lose it, you may lose access to it because you may be the only one with access to that room. So whatever's in that room may be lost forever if you lose the hard drive with the key. But you don't lose the Bitcoins. And so that implies why you can't just copy what's on the wallet and that just gives you another access to the card. But there's still only one copy of what's in the room, so to speak. And so the Bitcoins are, the room in this case is the blockchain. They're on the blockchain. You can't copy them, and that the blockchain ensures that. So yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting question. I'm kind of just really working to lay out all of these different concepts. And so I thought that was a good little aside there. Sure. So what, like, also, I just want to mention, like, we do have the Ask a Question box. So obviously I have lots of questions for Brett, but if other people have some questions that they want to ask Brett, feel free to use Ask a Question. I love seeing y'all chatting over there in the troll box. Please continue to do that. And also, of course, I noticed that Laurent is here, who's one of your alumnus from the Industry Connect course. And so definitely want to let you continue telling your story, Brett. But Laurent, if at any time, you'd like to come on after, after Brett and I have kind of finished up, or maybe during, or, really anyone else kind of once Brett and I are done, I don't know if we're going to take the whole time. And so I thought this would be a fun chance to make Seminar a little more collaborative. So that's just kind of a little heads up and reminder about the Ask a Question box. But for now, Brett, I'm interested to learn more. Like, let's talk some more about Hello World. Like, do you remember like what was like maybe the most difficult challenge that ended up being the most rewarding, or like what was like the coolest challenge or anything?
Yeah, so I really liked the Ink smart contract challenges because it was probably the first time doing any of the challenges that I got to use Rust, what Substrate and everything is built in. So that was really cool. And I think that one reason that I think the challenges took me a lot longer than maybe some other people is that I spent a lot of time making my UI look like pretty decent. And that was pretty rewarding for me, like working on almost having like a full stack development for some of these challenges, where I had I set up the Substrate node, added the contract palette, I coded a smart contract and tested it. I then wrote a front end with the Polkadot JS API to interact with it. I even went as far as to incorporate the Polkadot extension into some of my projects, which definitely wasn't a requirement, but I wanted to figure out how that exactly worked. So yeah, I think those were
Polkadot extension is like a browser extension that you use to hold your keys, right? So you can share the keys between different tabs or whatever, different apps.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, just like a MetaMask, if people have used that.
Yeah, but I think it's more secure than MetaMask because it does support like cold wallets. I don't know if MetaMask really supports cold wallets. It only does like the hot keys.
Yeah, I honestly haven't used the Polkadot extension too much. I think I have just by, spending a lot of time in the Discord, seen people say that either it is coming soon or it's already here, where they support like the Ledger hard wallet the same way that the Polkadot apps API wallet does. So like that's a really cool thing about it.
I know that the extension supports Parity Signer, which is what I used for my cold wallet, because it's free in that you use an old phone that you have lying around, which I think is great. Very, very cool. So I'm guessing you haven't done a lot of work in Solidity, right? Based on what you've told me.
Yeah, no, I really haven't whatsoever. I tried a little bit of it when I was in university. I honestly barely remember anything from that class whatsoever. It was the first time they were teaching. It was like blockchain development, but it was the first time they were teaching it as a special topics. I think the most Solidity programming I did was that Crypto Zombies like mini game, and then most of the tests and projects and stuff were like not even related to blockchain in the end.
I really like hearing that the Ink projects were your favorite, because I have like an intuitive sense that Ink is a really, really nice programming language. And of course, I'm very biased because it was developed in-house at Parity, and I really like what we do at Parity. But I also like know the guy who led the development of it, and he's super smart, and like he created great documentation, which for me, if I see a developer working hard at the documentation, I'm like, oh, they're really proud of this. They really care about this, and they want this to succeed. And so I just have this kind of like intuitive sense that Ink is really nice, but I'm getting to the point where like I want to do a little bit more of a deep dive into like Ink versus Solidity, like at the programming language level. Yeah, so I was just wondering if you have thoughts on that. If anyone else has any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear that. Or do you have any thoughts to share right now, Brett?
Yeah, one thing I can say is that I'm a huge fan of simple languages, and a lot of people might look at Rust and be like, that's not a simple language, but in my mind it kind of is. It's pretty elegant, and a lot of the complexity comes from restraints that you have when doing it for the whole type safety thing. The one thing I will say about like looking at Solidity and the tiny bit of Solidity I had to do for the Hello World hackathon for some of the sponsor prizes, it just doesn't seem super elegant. There are a ton of extra keywords that like, I mean, hard for me to think of examples off the top of my head, but like those don't exist in Ink so much.
I totally hear what you're saying. And I think one way for me to kind of like take what you're saying and like rework it and then spit it out the other end is like with Ink or Rust based languages, you may be trading like a little bit of programming complexity in getting all of this, like the type conversion stuff that can be really, really tough with Ink. But then once you get something compiled, it's simple, simple, simple. It's so declarative, so straightforward that you know, like all that work that you did to get everything just so, it really pays off. Whereas in Solidity, there's a ton of keywords. I know exactly what you're talking about. And you're like, they're just kind of like random ones, like payable, you know, like it feels like things were just kind of like kludged on as opposed to being designed.
For sure.
But I don't really, again, this is just my intuitive. I'm not here to give like a real comparison of the two languages. Cool. Anything else about Hello World that was like memorable to you or?
Well, it sort of, Hello World kind of brings me into the next step of my journey per se, which is, you know, I was super active in the community and everything. And I was constantly in the Discord, spending a lot of time programming, and Dan Reeser reached out to me just to sort of hop on a call and, you know, get to know me a little bit. And it was because of that, you know, I hopped on the call and met him, had a good conversation. We kept in touch a little bit throughout the hackathon. And I mentioned to him, like, because he asked me, like, what do I do? Like, am I working? Am I a student? And I explained to him my situation of, you know, recent grad during COVID makes it kind of hard. But, you know, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing the hackathon and learning more stuff about this. It's really interesting to me. And so he told me about the Industry Connect Substrate Dev Academy, because he was like, you seem like a really good candidate for this. If doing more of the actual like blockchain coding is something that you want to do, then this is definitely something you should check out. And he actually helped me get a sponsorship for it, which was awesome, so that I could jump in and actually get started with that. And so one thing that I can say about it is that, I did a little bit of Substrate development during the hackathon, the Hello World hackathon. But that was really just like, you know, copy pasting some stuff, changing some things in the runtime, being incredibly confused because of the like specific Substrate macros that they're using. And sometimes I'm still confused, as you know, from my posts in the chat.
Same.
But I really didn't like know much about actual Substrate, so I was really excited.
I do think I'm gonna go ahead and you did a lot during Hello World, for sure, and I understand that maybe like you made it far enough up the Dunning-Kruger curve that you were like just starting to realize how much you didn't actually know. But I do think, you know, the Industry Connect Academy, I think it's important to understand that in order to make the most out of it, you really should go into it, I think, with a little bit of experience, a little bit of understanding. I hear where you're going, that it's a good introduction to the world of Substrate, but I think that would be one thing that I would like to add on there, as someone who's also kind of like involved in the course from more of a administrative point of view, is that I think actually taking the time to do a little bit of research beforehand and kind of understand what you're getting yourself into, complete the first couple of tutorials at least. You know, you don't have to spend 3 months on Hello World. That's like, obviously Brett's here like a gold star student. We don't all have to be Brett Kolodny's, but spending some time to get involved a little bit before you jump into the Developer Academy, I think is a really good idea. And I also want to take this chance to mention that the next intake of the Developer Academy is starting this month. Registration is open now. I'll drop a link here in a second. But part of why we're here today is to make sure that you all know about this Developer Academy intake that's starting. So if you're inspired by Brett's journey and you want to do more Brett-like things, you may want to consider signing up for this course. So Brett, I'm going to pass it back over to you to talk about your experience. And while you do that, I'll share the link to the Academy.
Yeah, sure. And just, to agree with what you said, I think that a little bit of context behind Substrate would probably be great. I definitely had that. The other thing is that I would super recommend, like, if you decide this is something you want to do, spending just like as much time as you like reasonably can, just sort of going through the Rust book, because Rust is an awesome language. I love it, and I'm super lucky to have randomly decided to learn it like 3 years ago. But it is a tough language to get used to, especially if you're coming from a language like Python or JavaScript or something like that. So that would definitely be my recommendation there. But yeah, so back to the like actual content of Industry Connect, the Dev Academy. It was really enjoyable because it really, like you were saying, in terms of like figuring how much stuff I didn't know. There were a lot of questions sort of lingering in my mind about Polkadot and Substrate compared to something like Ethereum, which I had heard about. Like some things like, everyone knows now that Ethereum is like really bloated and gas prices are through the roof.
Bloated and gassy.
Exactly. And so one of the things that, Polkadot and just Substrate-based blockchains promise to be able to fix is lower transaction fees and things like that. And so I was just sort of, I read that and I went, cool, how? And so actually going through the bootcamp, I got an understanding of that. There's lots of lectures on that. There's a whole, I think, series of lectures based on like weight and assigning weight to different extrinsics in your palette, talking about how to set up palettes in general. So like how these like blockchains can be so modular and how you can set them up and how they can now interact with different palettes and things like that. That was super awesome to learn about. And one of the biggest things, which sort of gets me to another thing that I was working at the same time, is that it's not just like, it's not just like the development, it's all aspects of development, which is something that, a lot of programmers don't necessarily like, but, they do spend a lot of time covering documentation and testing, which, nobody loves doing tons of documentation and testing. Do you?
I do.
Okay, never mind.
I like it a lot more than not having the documentation and testing there.
Sure.
Like that's where the real pain comes in.
Yeah, no, and I'll actually have an example of that in a little bit.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, there's not only documentation, but design was another big focus of the course. A lot of the assignments, it would be do some programming, but also design the stuff you're going to be doing in the next assignment.
Yeah.
Which is
like even as a, back when I actually used to be a software engineer, now I just talk about software engineering, but I believe it or not, I actually used to be a software engineer. And it's not at all uncommon, at least for me, like kind of a normal software engineer, not the Brian Chens of the world, like architect status, but I would often write a little bit of code, and it worked, it did its thing okay. And then I'd go to document it, which is very important. And that's when I really started to understand the design of what I had written. And oftentimes in the documentation process, you end up going back to development and maybe not really changing the API all that much, but maybe changing the architecture, the design of things a little bit and really improving things. And then you kind of move back forward. And that's a really important skill for being a real developer, not just someone who is participating in hackathons, and so getting these kind of like end-to-end things that you were talking about, like it involves all kind of stuff. So I love that point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I can definitely talk about how not only was that like an awesome thing to learn and how to do for Substrate, but just in general, like I am literally that person you just said. Most of the programming I do is personal projects or hackathons where the only person who's going to look at it is me. So, a lot of times I forgo this kind of thing. But, that was something that they really covered.
You can't do that in blockchain also, by the way.
100%,
Just like as you're talking about some of these things, like I obviously spend a lot of time thinking about how to educate people about Substrate and what we do and Polkadot and all these kinds of things. And really, as you're kind of indicating right now, this is a very, very broad computing topic. As I think more and more about it, it would almost be like if someone were to be like, okay, go out and teach people internet development.
Yeah.
That's what Polkadot development is. So we have people on like the networking side of things, all the way down at like the transport layer, HTTP protocol, that type of stuff. And then we have people all the way up at like cloud apps running in AWS, and this is all this like internet stack of computing. And that's what the Polkadot stack is. It includes all of that. And so especially at this stage in the game, we are 1976, Tim Berners-Lee building out the internet right now. Mostly what needs to be built out is a lot of this infrastructure stuff, this lower level stuff. This is very much what we do at Parity. And this lower level stuff, you don't mess around with it. You have to write code for that, tests and documentation for that lower level stuff. If there is a bug in that lower level stuff, this is the thing that you then see like running the news, like, oh, pseudo bug found in Linux, it backdoor. Like, you don't want bugs in this code. You need tests. You need to document it so you understand where to write the tests. Mm-hmm. It's highly, highly important with what we do in particular.
Yeah, 100%. There's no rolling back the server or anything like that when something goes wrong.
Nope. You can do an upgrade with Substrate. You can roll forward and fix the problem, but you can't erase the problem. The problem happened. You screwed up. Now you're in damage control mode. So you want to do everything you can to prevent from screwing up. And that means testing, documenting. Yep. Okay, yeah. I'm done with my soapbox, promise.
So yeah, I really enjoyed the flow of the course because it starts you off as pretty basic stuff. You're writing some small functions in Substrate. I mean, even before that, it's like, how do you compile your node? How do you run it versus running it like temporarily in dev mode and that stuff? And then it's like, okay, add some functions to your palette. And then, you add storage and things like that. And then later on it says, okay, well, instead of reinventing the wheel, let's incorporate with this other palette that'll take some of the load off of it. And, you really get a good idea of what it's like to develop a palette with like a good amount of functionality and purpose from scratch. But you also get a really good feel for how modular Substrate is. And that's part of the reason why Substrate is so powerful, because, people, you want to add something to your blockchain. Well, it might be as easy as just importing a library and adding some type definitions, and then boom, it's there.
Exactly. It's learning how to code within the framework is just as much of a deal as learning the framework itself. And that's what you're talking about, is learning the framework itself. And if I'm thinking about, like, I love obviously analogies and different ways of putting things, like in Linux, there are all these little programs like sed and awk and grep and, you know, whatever, that you don't need to reinvent the wheel with the bash script. You just kind of chain these things together. And a big part of it is just knowing that it's out there and understanding patterns for composing existing tools and why things were designed the way in which they were designed. And it takes a while to just kind of get into that.
Yeah. And that sort of goes into something else that I was doing at the same time as the bootcamp, which is I've been working on, and well, I guess just finished a hackathon project for the Encode hackathon, where we were working on a blockchain sort of roughly from scratch. And a big thing that I recommend to people is, you know, while you're going through the bootcamp, while you're going through the course, you really should, if you have the time and capabilities, be working on something outside of class, essentially, like putting these skills that you're learning to the test in a more loose way, because that's where you really start to like solidify a lot of your knowledge and figure out like different ways of implementing the things that you want to implement. And this is really where the design and testing things came in huge handy, because I was working with my teammate on the Substrate coding, and I was in the course, and he was just wanting to learn Substrate for the first time. So I sort of took a project management sort of position where I did the design docs for the for our palette, and we would both do a bit of implementing for them. And, you know, so that was really good because it let me sort of lay out like, okay, well, here are the storages that we need, here are the calls that we need, lay everything out really in a really handy way. But, you know, for the majority of the hackathon, we didn't have any tests. And so first of all, that's really annoying because it's like, okay, we added a new piece of functionality. We'll now fire it up, go into the Polkadot apps UI, go through the extrinsics, and let's assume that I get really unlucky and every single time I hit submit, it's this whole 6 seconds of the block time. And like, so that's really clunky, and like things looked like they were working and we were like, sure, whatever. But, you know, I was spending all this time doing the course and like learning how to write tests. And so I sat down, spent a couple hours one day, just like, okay, I'm going to write the tests for this finally. I'm finally just going to go through and do it. And the amount of bugs that we found in our code, and like really game-breaking bugs, the idea of like, we were doing some stuff with NFTs. So one of the things was like, yeah, sure, if the person wanted to buy something and it wasn't for sale, they couldn't. But if it was for sale and they just didn't have enough money, well, they'd be given the NFT, and then we would try to transfer the money out of from their account, and then that would fail, but they would still have the NFT. And
so what, can you tell me what rule of Substrate development you broke right there? It's a very important rule.
I forget the actual wording, but essentially you want to check before you actually do any sort of calls or changes of storage. Always check and then actually
verify first, write last.
Yes, there we go.
You check everything that could possibly go wrong, and only after you've done every single checked all your preconditions, like, does this person have enough money to pay for this NFT? That's when you start going into all of the actions or whatever, the what's the word I'm looking for? Side effects of what has occurred. Yep.
Yeah.
And so we have a informal question here. What's an NFT?
Sure.
An NFT is a non-fungible token, which is just typically you think of a cryptocurrency as like a quarter, basically, and like every quarter is just like every other quarter. It doesn't really matter. But an NFT would be a token that's unique in some way. It's non-fungible. Fungible means it's identical to everything else in the class. And an NFT just means there's a class of tokens where each one is unique, like maybe a deed or even a person's identity. We're all people, but unique people. You got it, Sam. Okay, continue, Brett.
Yeah, so there were we found a ton of different errors just from the fact that I was writing the tests and, writing the tests very thoroughly, checking to make sure that the balance of one person was what it was supposed to be before and after a transaction. One thing that is awesome about Substrate coding is the macros for the test. There's one, it's no op, which, you basically try to do something, and if it fails, make sure it's equal to this error. But it actually goes further than that, which is what actually caused me some confusion at one point, because not only is it saying, okay, make sure it works, and if it doesn't, make sure the error is correct. It's also making sure that as far as I can tell, the block hash is the same before and after this this transaction. So that means that there were times where, I would do something and I'd say, okay, this shouldn't work, and when it doesn't work, throw this error, and that error would throw. But the problem is that further up the line of that that call of that piece of code, some state change would happen. And so, not only is it sort of testing three things there, and that was just so useful because it just let us figure out like all these small things with the whole verify then write methodology. It wasn't like I had to do extra things. So that's something I just like about Rust in general too, is the inbuilt testing stuff they have.
Yep. Well, just to go back a second, because I think you brought up a really important point, and we've talked about this a little bit before in seminar, that Rust is a systems language that informs a lot of the quirks about Rust. And one of the things in a systems language, this goes back to this idea of programming for the lowest level where you want to be very careful, is that in a systems language, you essentially always want to assume that any operation may fail or succeed with either one could happen. And no matter what happens, you just handle it and you keep running. They're equally likely, and so both cases are handled. And so this no-op testing capability allows you to test behavior in the error case, I think, which is very, very important, because just like you want to know exactly what's going to happen when things go right, you want to know exactly what's going to happen when things go wrong. It's just as important. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a lot of what you're speaking to right now.
Yeah, and that sort of helped me get a better understanding of how the blockchain works in general. Because, beforehand, I wasn't actually 100% sure of, if I try to transfer a balance and that fails, but I did some side effects before that, are these things like completely scoped to the function and they're not actually going to get put on the blockchain unless the function successfully runs? And the answer is no, that's not the case. It will get put there, and that's really important to check.
That may change, but at this time, that's essentially the mindset that you should work under. And that's why this verify first, write last thing is so important. But in the future, I think we're working on like what's called transactional storage rights, which will make it more scoped like this. So things can succeed and fail as a batch, atomically, transactionally. But that is not the way that things are right now. But in the future, it may be more friendly in that way.
It sounds very functional in a certain sense. And I love functional programming, so that's exciting to hear about.
Nice.
But yeah, so the testing and design portions of the Substrate Dev Academy were really, really important to me and my teammates for getting us to be able to get a project together that worked both like on the surface level, but also like actually on the code level. And
yeah, by the way, as someone who like judges hackathons, I look at the tests for sure. Like, you know, you kind of have these like all of these different projects, and obviously like if there's a front end or whatever, you look at that and it's very nice to see a nice front end, but I'm not a front end guy. I don't get distracted by all that shiny stuff. I'm like, I want to see the tests, yo.
No.
Like the UI is kind of like table stakes. That's what's going to be like, okay, this is a project that's worth evaluating. And then I'm like, they got the tests. Okay, these guys mean business, or these people mean business.
You're completely subverting my hackathon strategy of flashy animation.
Sorry, yo, I'm not here to make your life easy. I'm here to make you a better developer like Brett.
Yeah, so we just finished up the Encode hackathon, and that was a lot of fun, really great learning. And like I said, doing the Substrate development on the side and really implementing the things that I learned in the academy not only like helped solidify my understanding of everything, but also just made everything run smoother, which was super awesome. Another kind of tangential note that I really liked about the Substrate Dev Academy is that there are a lot of comparisons to like, okay, here's how Ethereum does it, you know, Ethereum being the famous like flexible blockchain out there. And here's how Substrate does it. And like, here are the different ways it works. And I really like that because, you know, I hear a lot of people talking about how the comparisons between it and actually getting a sort of deeper understanding and knowing like when we talk about this being better than Ethereum or different than Ethereum, actually knowing what's going on there, especially as somebody who people have sort of coined the phrase Polkadot first. I'm Polkadot first. This is my first foray into blockchain and everything. That was really good to know for context and everything.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like I also, well, I shouldn't say I also, I cut my teeth in the Ethereum ecosystem a little bit. I was just telling you about my visit to Japan to go to DevCon a couple years ago or whatever. So I definitely come from the Ethereum ecosystem, but something that you hear us say at Parity is like, we're not maximalists. And that's really true. Like, I mean, first of all, Gav he helped write Ethereum. So you're not really going to hear us like saying a lot of bad shit about Ethereum because our dude like helped write it. And so Ethereum's awesome. Like it's really, really cool, but it's also very true and productive and like worthwhile to point out that when Gav was building Polkadot, designing Polkadot, when we at Parity build Polkadot, we are very much looking to Ethereum as inspiration, but also is like, how can we make a quantum leap, make things better? We do want to make things better than Ethereum. And this isn't to denigrate Ethereum. They've done a wonderful job. They were here years before us. They have a great name. You know, we wish that our token was worth as much as Ethereum. All of this wonderful stuff for sure, you know. But yeah, there is part of what we are doing is looking at existing blockchain platforms and trying to make things better. And that's not just something that we say to make our token price go higher. There's like something to that, you know, and why, really understanding why it's better, more scalable. That's what's going to help you be a better developer. Because now you're like, I understand how to make the best of this platform and why it was written the way that it was. So very important point.
Yeah, and to actually speak on something you just said, one of the reasons that Polkadot really drew me in, especially when I sort of had this negative viewpoint of blockchain before Polkadot, Hello World, and everything like that, was that it was so tech first. Like everything I was reading about it wasn't like talking about, you know, the coin and like how much money it's going to be worth and how all that stuff. It was like, hey, here's our tech. Here's the things that like are backing Polkadot. and here's like the really cool ways we're integrating this stuff. And as a tech person, that's the kind of stuff that I was reading, and I went, that's really interesting. That's really cool. Oh, that's how they're dealing with that. That makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't have thought of that. Or like that answers my question about scalability. So that was.
It's in like I struggle with this a lot in my job, like working. A lot of what I do in my job is balance this idea of like cryptocurrency, and obviously people are motivated by that. I personally am not really particularly motivated by that. I don't own any cryptocurrency. I don't really want to trade assets to try to make money. It's just not who I am. I'm motivated by like, oh, this code is cool, it's fun. I like that it's very subversive and that actually it may prevent people from making lots of money. Like that's more the angle that I come at it from. But it is, on the other hand, like obviously we all need to support ourselves. We all need to enrich ourselves and that kind of stuff. And so it's not really what we're about. It's not really what I'm about, you know. So obviously I'm not having you on here to talk about trading. I'm having you on here to talk about the hard journey of like several months. This isn't a get rich quick thing, but finding ways to also make sure that people understand it's economically viable. You can
for sure
make money off of it. And maybe this is a good segue into what came next for you after the Developer Academy.
Yeah, sure. So after the Developer Academy, and as things were winding down with the hackathon, I started thinking, okay, this has been a really awesome journey so far. I don't really want this journey to end here. How can I like land a job in this ecosystem? And so, you know, I mean, one of the really important things that people tell you all the time is networking, but also, you know, not just networking, but making meaningful connections with people in the community and being like active and stuff. And that all really paid off for me because through that, I was able to get an interview and then ultimately a job at Acala as a software developer.
Yeah. And I mean, you did a good job of networking. Like you and I have certainly had conversations. You mentioned your relationship with Dan Reeser. You also worked really, really hard. People like Dan Reeser and I, like there's a lot of people who want to network with people that work at Parity and with Acala and at Polkadot. And it's our job to focus on the people that work hard at more than just networking, that are putting in the really hard work. And so, yeah, like I think was yesterday your first day?
Yep, yesterday was my first day.
That's really exciting. Do you have anything you want to share? I mean, I remember my first day at my first job. I was like, yeah, I felt like an idiot. Like, what do you want me to say? Like, how was it? Tell me about it.
Oh, I mean, like you definitely. I mean, first of all, it's really nerve-wracking because this is not only like my first day at Acala, it's my first day at a job that I've ever had. This is my job out of college, and like I can't even like begin to describe how ecstatic I am about that. That like my first job is at a company as like cool and like innovative as Acala. But it is nerve-wracking because it's like, yes, I have put in a ton of work and I've been, you know, trying to learn as much as I can. But then, you know, the people on my team are people like Brian who are just like
no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. And he's a great guy and he's super nice and like you know, telling me like, oh, if I have any questions, just post in the chat, someone will help and all that stuff. But there is a certain level of, you know, amount that I want to live up to, and I think I'll be able to do it, but it's definitely hard getting in. I'm also their first college grad that they've hired. So I'm like the newbiest newbie on the team in like all senses of the word. And like their understanding of that, and like that's both super cool, but also again, like, you know, a lot to live up to.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the biggest things about the first day was, you know, going through some onboarding stuff, just trying to compile some code.
Get that right nightly, find that right nightly version.
Yeah, that's literally what it was. It was okay.
I know.
Yeah, I've been using, I can tell you the exact date. I've been using October 5th, 2020 Rust Nightly for all of my development.
Yep. Well, that was the 2.0 nightly. I also know them by heart.
And
yes.
So I'm like, okay, it's just like run this, like, clone this repo, run it. Okay, awesome. Okay, didn't compile. Okay, well, maybe let me try the most recent nightly, see if that works. Nope, that didn't work. Okay, got to find the right one. And even though it took me like 3 seconds to say all of that, reason I probably need to upgrade my laptop is that it took like over an hour of trying to compile to figure that stuff out, which is a definitely difficult part about working with.
That's something we got to work on over here at Parity. We're talking about this all the time. The stuff with the nightlies, the compile times, we're working on it. It's a big job. And what I was going to say to Brett is, like you mentioned, I was a little bit like, it's a little scary. I am fully one of those people that believe if you're not scared, then you need to push yourself a little bit harder. Yes, Tom, that was a classic. Oh, the good old days. That's really funny. That is so awesome, Brett. I feel like I had another couple questions. We do have some questions from the audience. Let's take a look at those. Let's see. I'm just going to take. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with apologies for the mispronunciation of the name, Sans. So this person asks, what do you recommend for those beginning with no true coding or developer background? And Thomas has already given a comment. Let's see what he says. Those seminars, watch all of them and get to know basics of Rust and Substrate, and take into consideration that there will be sleepless nights. Have a patience with Rust. Very good. What about you, Brett? What do you think?
So I will definitely say that Rust is it's not the most beginner-friendly language, but you will come to appreciate Rust so much if you are dedicated and put in the effort. You hear a lot of people talking about wrestling with the borrow checker, which I won't get into too deeply, but let's just say that like everything that every time Rust puts a hurdle in front of you, it's because it's trying to help you and it's trying to make your code better and safer. And one thing that's awesome about Rust is, like, once you do get the code to run, it more or less works. You're more or less good to go. In terms of recommendations for somebody with no programming background, if you want to try jumping straight into Rust, that's awesome. It might be kind of difficult.
I would not recommend that, TBH.
Yeah. So I would almost, if you're just sort of curious about, getting into programming in this ecosystem, I think that JavaScript and the Polkadot.js API would be a great place to start.
Yeah.
I won't be doing any low-level stuff, but like a lot of the really fun stuff is making these awesome D apps, which is something you can definitely do. I mean, even a lot of parachains are now also doing, they're implementing the EVM palette. So Solidity is a little bit more user-friendly than Rust. So if you wanted to get into full like DApp type stuff, you can stick with a lot of the great tooling that has been developed for Ethereum and still be on the Polkadot ecosystem. I think that's like a really great starting point if you're sort of wanting to get into developing in this space. Yeah. And my biggest recommendation is, if you're not in the Discord, join the Discord. We're all super friendly there and constantly giving each other help. So like, there's no question that is too newbie or too like obvious. Like someone will give you an answer or at least link you to an article that would say good thing to read.
Yeah, I think everyone in the Discord, in the Element, whichever one you're using, we have bridges for all of our chats. We all remember the pain of learning this ourselves. And so we want to help other people learn it. I'm actually going to go a little bit farther than you, Brett, and say I would really suggest before you try to dive into the Polkadot ecosystem, I would really suggest just using like a free code camp or something like that to take a month or two to learn just JavaScript. Just learn about loops. Another thing that you really have to get comfortable with, and this may be something you kind of need to learn like in parallel with learning JavaScript, is you probably want to learn to get fairly comfortable on the Linux command line. This is You know, that's a thing that I think a lot of people take for granted, but it's kind of its own skill. So those are the two things that I would honestly encourage you to spend 1 to 3 months before you even try to learn about blockchain. Because like Brett and I both have bachelor's degrees in software engineering. And I got my bachelor degree, by the way, I started when I was 27, graduated when I was 30. So I remember what it was like to learn all of this stuff as like an adult who's like, what the heck are these people talking about, you know? And so I would really encourage you, like, in order to understand blockchain, like Gav has a freaking PhD in computer science, you know? So in order to even start to understand what he wrote, you kind of need to have some core understanding. Like if I were to ask Brett right now, how do you implement a hash map? I can almost guarantee you he would be able to give me a pretty good answer to that question, you know? And that's the type of question that I really think you probably would like to at least know how to start answering that question before you try to get down to the blockchain level. Blockchain, period, is not beginner programming. It's somewhat complicated. And then Polkadot is not the world's most simple blockchain. In order to be next gen, we have to be a little bit more advanced. And so I wish that in my job, I could tell people, oh, we're super beginner friendly, you know, but especially where we are in our maturity as kind of the company that's stewarding this ecosystem, and we are still down at this infrastructure level, I think the best thing that I can do in my job is to let people understand the magnitude of what we're doing. It's not little stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that I will sort of add to that is a question I get a lot from people when they just ask me, like, I want to get into programming, what should I start with? It really doesn't matter what you start with. You could start, if you find a really great course that you like in Python, if you find a really great course that you like in JavaScript, Perl, if you find an old enough course for that.
Let's not give bad advice now.
Okay, sure.
But like any modern programming language, you want to learn how a loop works, you know, control flow, big O notation, data structures. Like these are, you know, it's interesting, but not the most glamorous stuff. So
yeah, and my point was going to be that no matter any programming language you learn, if you learn it to a good enough extent, all those skills transcend into every other language. It just completely carries over. Learning a new programming language is not like learning a new spoken language. Once you know one programming language, especially not to get too nerdy in like the C type programming languages,
curly bracket programming languages, that's what I call them.
Yeah. You're gonna be good. There's gonna be some idiosyncrasies here and there, but you know, whatever is the least barrier to entry for you into like programming is what you should go with. If somebody's telling you like, well, you definitely shouldn't start with Python or JavaScript because JavaScript sucks and Python is too basic, you have to be starting with C or C++.
No. My personal suggestion, I am a known Python hater. I realize that it has its place. I do not ever want to go to those places. And so that being said, I would not recommend Python because it's not a curly bracket. It's not a C-style programming language. And even like Rust is a curly bracket programming language. It's kind of all the way on the far end of that. But Python is kind of like over there on its own. Like it has loops. You'll get to learn big O notation. It has maps. But I would stick with like, you know, JavaScript, Java, Go, any of the curly bracket languages. I hate Python.
Sure, yeah. I used to teach kids programming while I was in college, and Python was the big one that I would use. And there are definitely some idiosyncrasies about Python that I think make it confusing. JavaScript, as much hate everyone gives you about it, it's also going to be it's also going to be very forgiving.
Yeah.
which is good for a beginner. You know, it's not going to yell at you if you forget a semicolon, even though you should definitely put those semicolons in.
Rust is like, when you're writing Rust, it's like you have to write an academic paper, like a dissertation that you are like defending to a council of elders. You know, when you write JavaScript, it's like you're having a beer with your computer. It's like we're talking right now. I love writing JavaScript. That's my dog right there. Okay. Any other comments about like how to learn programming languages or how to anything like that?
I think the biggest no. So I do. I do have two pieces of advice. For some reason I thought you were asking the chat. So one thing is that following a tutorial is great, but just like I was saying with the Substrate Dev Academy, you got to start working on your own projects as pretty early as you possibly can. And a big way that I personally go about doing this is if I want to learn a new framework or a new language or something like that, I will find a tutorial on it, and I will do the tutorial up until a certain point. While I'm doing the tutorial, once I have a little bit of an understanding, I'll sort of read the synopsis of what this part of the tutorial is trying to do and implement it myself, and then go back and see how they did it and try to learn from that. And then at the end of everything, I think, okay, what's a new piece of functionality that I can add to this that's not in the tutorial? So, you know, I'm sort of building off of a baseline because, you know, starting can be really hard, but I am doing things on my own. I'm thinking on my own, because watching a YouTube tutorial on how to make like a to-do list, if you're just literally copying line by line each thing of code, it's not going to help you in the end. So really trying to do things as off the book as possible, but using the whatever sort of tutorial you're using as like a general guide of where to go is how I would recommend doing it.
Yeah, that's really helpful, really good advice. And, you know, going back to kind of like the purpose of this seminar, a lot of it is because it feels like Brett is, again, just a great exemplar for people to follow. Like he kind of like, as if I'm the person who's like putting out these like breadcrumbs or whatever, like Brett like clearly picked up every single crumb along the way and made it all the way to the end of the trail. And so I think if I were to kind of like reiterate what it is that you're saying, very intentionally, we do not really create tutorials. Like the goal of a tutorial is not really to give the participant a deep understanding of a topic. It's to introduce the participant to the concepts that they're going to need to know. Tutorials hook people, and they're interesting. There's a lot of boring stuff that you need to learn to get good at this. And we don't talk about that in the tutorials because we want to hook you. And then like the documentation is where more of the important boring stuff is.
Yep.
And yeah, so I love that. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question because I think we gave some really good advice there. Thank you so much. Let's see. Let's go to this one from Sam. Sam's doing the Substrate tutorials, but it's all running locally on his machine. He wants to make something where some friends and he can exchange tokens between our machines. Is there docs to deploy to the cloud? No, there really isn't. That's a good question, but what you can do, Sam, is at least for temporary purposes, you can use the Substrate Playground, and this will deploy it to the cloud, and you can interact with Polkadot.js apps UI, but these are ephemeral instances, obviously, where they're on our infrastructure. So A, there's a limited number of them, and B, if they're not used for a certain period of time, or maybe even they just have a shelf life of like 3 hours, but you can use that as a stopgap measure. I did write a quick little guide about setting up a Ksm validator that may help a little bit. I do agree that we could provide some more docs around this, but this is actually the kind of thing that you're going to learn more about on the Polkadot wiki, because this is more about deploying and running a Substrate-based node as opposed to building with Substrate. So this is a very long-winded way, my favorite way of doing things, of saying no. But in the troll box there, or in the comments as well, I'm going to follow up with some resources. But in the meantime, I'm going to go on to the next question. Brett, do you have any comments on this while I look for those resources?
I've used AWS before, and EC2 instances are fairly easy to set up. I couldn't tell you, and there are free tier ones for that. I don't know if they, how long I'd be able to run it due to like storage constraints and things like that. But it would definitely be something worth looking into. If you just wanted to set up something that like you and your friends could interact with at the same time, there is a free utility tool called Ngrok, which lets you sort of get host your local host in a secure way. It's really good for, you know, showing people what you're working on your machine. There are limitations to number of connections and things like that, but you could probably hack something together with it if you just wanted to like play around and have something cool going, but not something that would be running eternally.
Awesome. Thank you, Brett. That was wonderful cover for me to get those links and add them. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so last question in the troll box, but we still have some time. So if there's more questions, please feel free to ask them. Tomek wants to know, what is the level of pressure while full-time job in Parity and or Web3 Foundation? Truth or leave it? We only speak the truth here. So I'll go ahead and take this because I think, Brett, as we know, you just had your first day and you're not really with Parity or Web3 Foundation anyways. Brett just got a job with Acala, which is one of the most prominent companies, if I'm going to put it very diplomatically and not use any kind of relative terms. It's a great company building in our ecosystem. And then I'm, of course, an employee of Parity Technologies. And actually, I think this is a really interesting question because one of the things that I wanted to chat about, this goes back to one of the early conversations that you and I had, Brett, about working in an environment like the blockchain industry, like the open source world, like the world where you live in Buffalo, New York, and your boss is in Auckland, New Zealand, and it's very different than going into an office every day, fresh out of college, and having a boss kind of like take you around and introduce you to everyone. And, oh, this is where you get the coffee. It's different, So there is a lot of responsibility. I can't speak for what it's like at Acala, but there's a couple of funny things. I mean, starting from the beginning, blockchain industry. This is an industry that we are still defining our viability. There are not tried and true business models like there are for software as a service companies or big data or any of this kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of ambiguity there that as a team, all working together, Polkadot, Ethereum, Bitcoin, we all need to work together to prove the viability of this technology. Then we bring in open source, and I love how Brett kind of mentioned, I certainly identify with this, how that can kind of like be a little glimmer that really gets you excited. Like, guys, there is nothing preventing you from getting involved in this right now. That was the approach that I took. I was unemployed. I wasn't just out of school. I was unemployed for other reasons, not quite so wonderful reasons. And I was like, dude, what they're doing at Parity is awesome. That's what I want to do. And I kind of had this moment where I was like, wait a second, they're open source. I'm an unemployed software engineer. Just do it. And maybe they'll start paying me to do it. And they did. But that kind of, kind of like just do it kind of attitude, I think Parity, Web3 Foundation, you got something to say, Brett?
Well, what I was going to add to that is just that, like you said, blockchain is you know, like you said, way back in the beginning, we're sort of like 1970, I think you said six, building these things from scratch. So, you know, there's a lot of overlap between the types of companies in blockchain right now and just like startup culture in general. But the biggest thing is that everyone is super passionate about what they're doing, and they're here because they want to be here. And you have to be ready to put that amount of effort and passion into it, because, you know, everyone is trying their hardest and doing their best to try to make some really cool stuff. And they expect that from you too. And I think that, you know, for me, thinking about what I wanted as a recent grad, and this is something that me and Dan had talked about, was thinking about, you know, is a startup-like environment something that would be best for me in the beginning? Because, you know, you get a lot more support and sort of ease into the transition of everything if you work at a more established company. Like you said, like even just, you know, going into the office and meeting everybody, them showing you where your desk is, them doing all this stuff.
Stand up every day, you know, which is like, after a while you're going to hate it, but it's worth it. Do it. You know, I gave this advice to Brett, you know, and I think that he has every kind of skill that he needs to make the most of where he's at. He clearly did a lot of work on his own, like doing Hello World before signing up for Industry Connect, and like all of these kind of things that kind of proves to me, like, okay. But to be honest with you, that's not the journey that I took. I took a very much more kind of traditional journey where I did like kind of like a junior internship while I was getting my CS degree. Then I did like an internship at Salesforce. You know, I lived out in San Francisco and kind of did that. Then I had 2 different jobs in the software industry, going into the office every day, kind of working my way up from the noob, you know, first computer science job ever as like a 30-year-old. Like, who the heck is this guy, you know? And then, you know, okay, now I'm like writing a design document maybe. Okay, now I'm like a Scrum Master, you know, and now like here I am at Parity. So different journeys, but yeah. What else was I going to say? I like that you point out that everyone in this industry is very passionate. I'm going to qualify that a little bit.
Sure.
You want to make sure that you are aligning yourself with the people that are truly very passionate about what they're doing, that are challenging you and making you more passionate, because there are people in the cryptocurrency industry that are only passionate about making a quick buck for themselves. That's an unfortunate fact. That's something that I would want to warn newcomers to this ecosystem about. And so just keep an eye out on that. You know, I obviously am very biased and will tell you that that's not who we are at Parity, and most of the people in our ecosystem are not like that. But I think that's an important thing to keep an eye out for, and look for those people that are more concerned about ethical purity than token price, and find the people who are more interested in preventing accumulation of wealth than the people who are looking to promote the accumulation of wealth. That's my personal suggestion, but you know, that's just me.
Yeah. For me, in terms of making my decision, because like I said, Dan gave me amazing advice way back in like October when I first talked to him. And so I had to think about what type of company did I want to pursue, because that kind of would affect whether or not I wanted to be in this industry right now. And for me, you know, I knew that I had to put in the work and put in the effort if I wanted to get one of these jobs. And I was really looking for a company that I could, that I really aligned with, like you said, the sort of ethos of the company, and a company that I felt like I could grow as a developer, both like technically and professionally. And that's what ended up ultimately helping me make my decision. And then obviously the work that I thought Acala was doing and everything was super awesome and just something I wanted to be a part of.
Totally. And just one final comment on what it's like to work at Parity in particular. One of the things that I use to describe that experience is it's a wonderful challenge, but it is a challenge. Parity is a company where you should expect people to challenge everything that you say, and not particularly politely either. It's very upfront. very, we really embrace the open source ethos of like peer review, code review. So going all the way up to the highest levels of our company, everything is code reviewed. Everyone is ready to hear this very direct feedback and then defend what they're saying. And that can be a challenge. You have to have a lot of strength in what you're saying and a lot of belief in what you're saying. And then you're going to grow a lot by either realizing like, oh crap, these other people are like completely right. And I was very wrong in this thing that I thought I was very right in, or you'll grow very strong in making your point. But yeah, this is not beginner level work is how I would describe it. Great question, Tomek. Let's see. Okay, we have a couple questions about Ngrok. Maybe Brett, can you share the correct link for Ngrok there?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. And then I'm going to answer this question from Renard. Okay, so what coding language would be most beneficial for me to learn? Definitively, I think what Brett and I are saying is we're not going to answer that question for you. You need to answer that question for you. You need to do a little research. And, we gave you a few ideas. There's Python, which I didn't really recommend because it's not C style, because it exists to serve pretty particular purposes. I think JavaScript was one that both Brett and I mentioned in particular up front. I like Go a lot, but again, that's kind of advanced. I actually think, C or maybe even C++, not a bad thing to consider, but again, a little bit on the advanced side.
I think Java. I feel the same way about C++ that you do about Python.
I don't know why everyone hates C++. It was one of the first programming languages that I worked with out of school. I worked at a company called FactSet Research Systems, which is like a 40-year-old company. And then in particular, my boss went to A&M University, and the creator of C++, Bjorn Strup or whatever, he is the dean of the A&M CS department. And so I kind of was brought up in a place where C++, look, C++ is older than I am, I think, or close to it, and it is still being used every day, and they're improving it, and you got Boost, and you got, C++ 17. Look, if you're going to give Rust the benefit of the doubt, give C++ the benefit of the doubt, please.
So here's my comment. I think that within C++, there is a great language.
There's a lot of legacy there. There's a lot of legacy there.
You gotta sort of polish it, and then you gotta say never use these parts of it. But then eventually, when you whittle it down, there's a great language in there.
Exactly. And Rust is more like, okay, we learned those lessons from 35 years of C++, and now let's make like a quantum leap. So there are, even though we're describing Rust as a curly brace C-style language, it's like all the way on the other end. Yeah, really great comments. So Renard, not going to answer that question, but I think we've given you some great feedback to kind of go and discover your own answer to that question. And Tomek, I see that, let's see, I'm just going to grab lots of people chiming in on C++. I love it. I'm just going to make sure that we get this comment here for Tomek about where we can find Ngrok. So done answering.
Yeah, I posted in the chat.
In the troll box. Yep, I saw that. I just wanted to put it on the question itself as well. Awesome. So I do have a meeting at 12:30, so I do have a hard stop in about 5 minutes or so. And this feels like I don't see any more questions, but we do have a few more minutes if there are any more. Brett, do you have any kind of parting thoughts as we're winding down the tale of your journey, the epic tale of Brett?
Well, my first thought is I hope this isn't the end of my journey.
Right. Yes. The beginning. Sorry.
Yeah. I hope that this is just the very beginning. It's been, I want to thank everybody who's watching and part of the Polkadot community for making the community what it is. I don't think I would have stuck with Hello World if I jumped into the Discord and it was full of, and either nobody was there or everyone was super rude, but everyone was super supportive and awesome. And that's really what got me into it. So thank you, everybody. And for people who are looking to get into it, I mean, you just gotta, put the work in and start doing it in whatever sort of way you can. I mean, like one thing that I started doing in the beginning, which helped me learn a ton, was just making changes to the documentation and updating things there. It's not lucrative or fun work, but it's
a little fun. It's a little fun.
It's fun to see your changes on the documentation that you're reading to try to figure something out.
Yep.
But yeah, like
if I do your code review, I try my best to make it fun. I always try to make stuff fun.
So yeah, just like working on those things whichever way you can. I think that if anyone is completely new, Dan, but I believe that somewhere all of the Polkadot, all those Hello World problems are out there for you to try. I think those are great beginner problems. Another thing is ETH Denver, I think, is starting in the next few days.
Yeah.
I know Polkadot is going to be there. I don't know if they're doing a Hello World style challenge thing, but definitely check that out. And, at the very least, like watch the talks and meet people and talk to people. Again, this community is awesome. So just like being a part of it, whether you're a developer, someone in the community, super fun. And if you're not a developer and you want to just be involved in the community, check out the ambassador program for Polkadot. That's another amazing way to get involved if you want to really be putting your time into it.
Yep. And don't forget that, next intake for Substrate Developer Academy is open now. So that's a really great way to kind of level up in all of this, and really also kind of like get deeply into the community in some ways. ETH Denver is, thank you very much, Laurent. It's an upcoming Ethereum community event, but we're going to be participating in that. So there's going to be, a Polkadot booth. I think Acala has a booth, right?
I think they're going to be there, yep.
Yep, and then there's actually going to be like a Kusama booth as well in the makerspace that I'm more involved in, kind of on the art gallery side of things. So just like I was saying, like Polkadot is kind of akin to the internet. You have the protocol developers all the way up to the application engineers, and even the people like talking about the internet, like buying stuff on Etsy or whatever. Like there's basically all of that and more in our ecosystem. So great suggestions there for ways to get involved. And yeah, I think the community is definitely it's the cherry on it all. Like not only is this like interesting technology that could really change the world, but there's really cool, interesting people who want to help you do it all. And so it's like, why not, man? What else are you going to do in 2021?
Sure.
Yep. Awesome. All right, Brett. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And maybe, another few months or whatever, you'll come on and tell us about the next part of your journey. I really hope so.
That'd be awesome.
And I hope that some other people were inspired, and, reach out to me if you'd like to come on and talk about anything. Just let me know, and we can definitely talk about that. So thank you very much, Brett. Enjoy your first week of work, and I'm really excited to see what you come out with.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Later, dude. Bye, everyone.
Bye,